Okay. Okay. So welcome to understanding the building blocks of you. What we have here is a way to map the key aspects of your personality. And the way I'm going to invite you to think about your personality is just identify where you are right now, that blue circle of you. And we're going to look at you through systems of adaptation. Those are those 5 systems in the gray area that go from your habit system, emotional system, relationship system, defensive system, and justification system. I'm going to be referring to those as your systems of adaptation. Then if you look to the right, you'll see various domains of traits, identity, values, virtues, abilities, and challenges. Those are your domains of development. Those are the areas of your character or personality that grow over time based on your experiences, and we will be exploring each of those domains. Also take a look at around the circle of those domains. You will see biological context, social context, and developmental context. We'll explore some of those, but I want to make sure that we understand that we, as humans, we live in biological contexts as organisms. We develop based on learning and experiences, and we live in a social and cultural context. And all of those 3 things play a huge role in how we develop. So that's the basic map I'm going to walk you through. So let's come back to you. Here you are, experiencing yourself and wondering and understanding and developing a map. So let's go move then back into these systems of adaptation. And I'm actually I'll start at the top and then I'll work my way down and then I'll come back and put them together. So if we go to the top, the first thing that you'll notice is it says your justification system. Justification is a word we use to describe your language system, your beliefs and values, the way in which you talk to yourself privately, what you say to other people. It refers to your verbal meaning-making system. What you believe, how you describe yourself, and as we'll see, it connects to your identity, who you are. Indeed, as you try to understand what I'm saying and understand this map and talk to yourself in the way it makes sense, you are using your system of justification. It consists of all your propositional knowledge about what is and ought to be, anything that you can turn into language and make a meaning-making statement about. That's your system of justification. If we drop down, the next system is your defensive system. This is actually one of the more complicated ones, and I will just say something very quickly. We'll come back to this. This is the system by which you cope and adjust. It's sort of like your psychological immune system that tells you, oh no, this might be a threat to your reputation, or this might result in something that's painful that you're experiencing. So you're on the lookout for it. And it tells you whether or not you're going to need to be prepared to cope. If you've ever felt threatened and defensive, like somebody was going to attack you in a particular way, or that you had thoughts that you weren't sure you should have, then you're aware of your defensive system. This will connect to what people who study psychology talk about as defensive mechanisms, the way in which we protect ourselves from our thoughts and might rationalize what we feel. I'll come back to this in a little bit more. Let me drop down and now talk about your relationship system. So think about when you walk into a room, whether you feel really comfortable and whether the people there are, you expect them as knowing you and valuing you, or whether you feel not very comfortable, like whether you're insecure or whether you feel like you may be rejected. What's happening there in your intuition is your experience of your relationship system. This starts right with birth. It's your attachment that you feel to your parents, and then it grows into your sense of whether or not you feel like you can influence people, how you imagine yourself in relating to other individuals, how connected you are, how known and valued you feel is a very, very important aspect of your relationship system, or the converse, whether you feel like people don't intuitively know and value you. We are constantly tracking our relationships, and we have internal working models for how people will treat us. And we use those models in our actual interpersonal relationships all the time. So that relationship system is what guides you in your interpersonal world, and it shapes how you think about yourself in relationship to other people inside. Go down a level to your emotional system. Your emotional system is really organized around pleasure and pain. These are the two broad categories of emotion that we call your positive emotion system, which consists of things like desire, joy, pride, love, and your negative emotion system, which consists of things like anxiety, depression, shame and guilt, anger and hostility. Your emotion system really sits as the emotion. E stands for energy, that energizes your movement. And the positive stuff tells you what to approach, and the negative emotions tell you what to avoid. This really is the core of your experience, your experiential place of being in the world. It tells you what to value and to move toward, and what might give you affordances and what might be threatening to you. Those negative emotions, that actually are things that trigger the defensive system, which I mentioned earlier. And then finally, you have your habit system. Okay? Your habit system is what basically the way you program procedures. If you ever recall learning how to drive, if you're able to drive a car, you may recall when you're first learning how to drive a car, how everything was in your consciousness. Everything was automatic. Well, when you learn a habit, what happens is you download it into your automatic behavioral system, so you don't have to think about it anymore. The habit system is the basic system that's guiding you, tracking stimuli and what orients you, and then enacting particular kinds of programs. Now, the habit system is crucial because it sets the routines of the day, and it gets you into a rhythm that you don't even need to think about. There are 5 core habits that are good to pay attention to in relationship to the day-to-day activities. So, for example, there's your sleeping habit. What's your routine of sleeping? When do you prepare yourself normally to go to bed? What's the rhythm of that? There's your eating habits in terms of the way in which you're bringing in food. And by the way, your habit system really connects to your body and the way your body functions. It brings us to the next key habit, which is how much energy you expend, your exercise, your activity level, your substance use, what kind of chemicals do you put in, and your sexual behaviors. So I actually use the acronym of SEESS, S-E-E-S-S, to characterize your broad domains of habit. And your habit also sets the stage for your lifestyle, okay? The daily activities. Okay, so what I want to say to you is that we're going to divide your way of interacting in the world through these different systems of adaptation. They're kind of like different organ systems in your body. You know, you have your skeletal system, your muscle system, your circulatory system, and they all work together to make your physiology. Well, these are like your systems of mental behavior, your systems of character adaptation. So we're going to now start at the bottom and move back up just so we have our flavor. So the most basic system are those procedural habits. They burn the nervous system and they become really automatic. They're triggered by stimuli, and then they engage in a particular activity, and you don't even need to think about them. But they're unbelievably crucial in terms of your routines and day-to-day activities. Right above that, in terms of consciousness, is your experiential system that's organized by your emotions. Your emotions are positive and negative, and they orient you to approach things or avoid things. And they're unbelievably key. Those are the core of them. And then they differentiate into more subtle emotions. That's especially true when we move up to the relational system. That relational system, it emerges out of the emotion system, but it tracks not just your relationship with the environment in general, but in particular, your environment with other people. How do they see you? How do you see them? How do you negotiate things like your feelings of power and competition, your feelings of love and connection or hostility, your feelings of dependency or your feelings of independency? How do you navigate those and guide yourself effectively in your exchanges with other people? Or conversely, what happens when you get in conflict and you feel maybe rejected, or you feel like you need to reject others? You have an intuitive relationship system that's guiding you. If we finally jump up to the justification system, that's that narrator. It tells you you're self-conscious. What are you thinking? It's the most conscious part of you, and it regulates how you talk to yourself and what you say to others. I jumped up to the justification system because that defensive system, what that does, it really regulates the relationship between your self-conscious system, what do you say to yourself, and your feeling. For example, it's been a couple of years ago or a while ago, I was at a place where, my wife said, "Gosh, Greg, you're really angry." I said, "I'm not angry. What are you talking about?" Well, obviously I was angry. My wife could see that my relational system was really activated, but my self-conscious system wasn't really aware of it. I was defending against being angry, and I denied that I was angry. But in fact, as she could tell, my emotion system, my procedural habit system, and my relationship system were actually activated, but my self-conscious justification system was sort of in denial. As we say as a joke, denial isn't just a river in Egypt. And that's that defensive system, those defense mechanisms, ways we try to reduce dissonance and talk to ourselves, filter our feelings to our self-conscious justification system. So these 5 systems of adaptation are all make up the way in which your mind relates to the environment, and they are different systems, just like you have different organ systems. These are really crucial systems to understand. Indeed, psychologists have focused on these different kinds of systems and have developed ways to help us understand how they contribute to maladaptive or dysfunctional patterns and how we can become aware of those and help become more adaptive in relation. So this core then allows us to move over to the next portion. And what you have, like I said, in the next portion are these domains of personality development. A domain of personality development is a way to understand the key areas of who you are through personality. Personality describes the way you're like everybody. Indeed, these are domains that virtually everybody would have. The way you're like some other people. So in some ways you might be high in a way, low in a way, relative to others. And it also describes ways in which you are very unique. So let's talk about these domains of character development. So the first domain I'd like to talk about is the orange domain of traits. Traits refer to your basic dispositions. They emerge, certainly the tendencies emerge in childhood, but they really settle down in young adulthood. You may have heard the term Big Five. Big Five refers to the key areas of traits that psychologists have identified across culture. And the Big Five, an acronym for the Big Five is OCEAN. That refers to openness, the extent to which you're actually exploring things, are curious, are interested in your feelings or other cultures, versus being more closed, reserved, and conservative in relationship to what feels comfortable. Once you get used to something, if you're not high in openness, you like that, you don't necessarily feel the need to explore. The next is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness refers to your achievement motivation, whether you're able to organize your goals or not, or are more impulsive and perhaps a bit irresponsible. E refers to extroversion. That's how energized your positive emotion system is, and in particular about how sociable you are and how much you like to connect. Low extroversion is individuals that don't have an energized positive emotion and also seem to be introverted, which is focused on themselves or being a little bit sensitive to social interaction. Agreeableness is the A. That's the extent to which your relationship system is oriented toward other people. Empathizing tends to be agreeable, tender-minded, or if you're disagreeable, competitive, critical, that's low on agreeableness. And then finally, there's neuroticism. That's the energy that is in the negative emotion system, and that refers to how much depression, anxiety, you're vulnerable to experiencing, how much you react negatively. People differ on neuroticism. So knowing your OCEAN traits are really key. We move up and we identify your identity. So your identity starts off as sort of a social actor like a kid's. We refer to this as your social actor identity when you're young. And basically you're looking to see what other people reward you for. You look to see what the rules are. You just have a conventional self. What really happens when in adolescence is this identity forms. This is what becomes an agent. When you really have a sense of consistency in your self-consciousness system, and you start to develop a complex sense of who you are and maybe who you ought to be. Indeed, many adolescents struggle with this fundamental question. We see lots of problems in psychology emerge because adolescents start to think, well, why am I different than others? Or how do I conform to my peers and reject my parents? These are all questions of identity. What brought you here is really your identity. You realize that maybe, hey, I want to understand myself better. I want to gain insight. I want to see what I need to accept and see what I can change to make my life better. Those are all ways in which your identity are affecting you, and your identity in some ways is the part that's most close to you. I also want to say there's the identity that's inside of you, and of course your social identity, which refers to the way in which you portray yourself to others and how they think about you. Closely related, but also somewhat different to identity, are your values and your virtues. You may find these in relationship to your religion or your morality. This fundamentally refers to what you think is good, what you think you might want to strive for, how you judge other people in terms of ethics, and it refers to kind of the strengths that you might have and the things that you would value in relationship to those virtues. Next, we come to abilities. Abilities refer to the basic capacities and talents that you have. And we can think about these in terms of your dispositional talents. Like, so for example, how intelligent you might be would be a trait-based ability. But then what you know would be your talents, your achievement talents. We can also think about things in relation to your music talent. Like me, I don't have hardly any musical talent whatsoever. You can have your athletic talent and other kinds of talents and sort of core abilities, things that you feel like you are naturally gifted at or things that you have struggled with. But it's very important to note that you might have a bias and then a learning that gives rise to your talent. And then finally, we come to challenges. Challenges are the kind of chronic difficulties that people have that get themselves into reactions. They experience difficulty, then they may react, and then all of a sudden that reaction creates more problems. So what you get with a challenge is when individuals' development tracks them into what we might call maladaptive patterns of being, whereby the stressors that they reach, the resources that they have, both internally and externally, combine so that they try to cope, and then their coping and way of responding actually creates more problems. So for example, if somebody has a social anxiety problem, they feel threatened in relationship with their connections with other people, they feel anxious, so then they avoid, and by avoiding, then they don't make many friends, and then they feel less status in relationship to that, and therefore they have less confidence in what they do, so they tend to avoid even more. So that would be a particular kind of challenge. Identifying your developmental challenges are actually crucial, so you can at least understand what they are. You can then understand what you need to accept, because we all have challenges. We're all going to have areas of weakness, and you can, by identifying them, learn to turn them around. So let's take a step back, and now let's look at this as a whole. Here you are at the blue circle. This is the building blocks of you. You can find yourself in your experience. If we locate you in your experience, what your experience is your emotional system and your experiential system and your narrator. And it sits inside your habit system and down into your body. And those 5 systems of adaptation are ways to understand the different domains of mental activity and the ways in which your mind guides you to adapt to the environment. Over to the left, we have the ways in which various domains develop over time in the wheel of character development. We have your traits, your identity, your values and virtues, your ability and challenges. All of those always are taking place in a biological context. They have a learning and developmental history, and they reside in a socio-historical context. So for example, if you were born in the United States, that's very different and raised there. That's very different than being born and raised in Saudi Arabia, India, or Brazil. That's sociocultural context. Likewise, if you grew up in a family where emotion was expressed and problems were addressed versus, say, an alcoholic family where individuals were abused, that's a very different developmental context. And of course, we all have different biologies that dispose us to particular kinds of ways of being in the world and create opportunities or problems. So that's your building blocks of you, your 5 systems of mental adaptation across the habit, emotional, relational, defensive, and justification, and 5 domains of character development. If we understand these domains, then we will be in a position to understand who we are, what strengths we have, what challenges, and how we might be able to move forward in an adaptive way.